It took only 3 episodes for Shadowlord to repair what years of Star Wars stories had quietly broken. A hooded figure cuts down through the roof of a moving train carriage and corners a frightened Padawan against the back wall. Maul drops into the fight from above, and for the first time in years, the moment does not feel like another Inquisitor is about to die. Something about the silent hunter on the other end of that red blade carries weight the Inquisitorius had not carried since the very first time they appeared on screen. Then the scene does the one thing Star Wars had trained audiences not to expect. Maul fails to end the fight. The former Sith apprentice lands clean strikes against the masked hunter, but the figure absorbs them and keeps advancing until Devon is forced to come to his aid. Together, they sever the train coupling and flee, leaving the silent figure standing alone on a carriage hurtling backward into the dark. Rather than defeating the Inquisitor, Maul and Devon are forced to escape him instead, and that reversal changes the entire equation. Before Maul ever crashed onto that carriage, the Inquisitors had been bleeding credibility for almost a decade. They were introduced as the nightmare that followed Order 66, sold as Vader's specialized Jedi hunters, the hand of the Empire reaching into every shadow where a surviving lightsaber might still glow. For a moment, in their earliest appearances, the audience believed it. The Grand Inquisitor stalking the halls of the Spire felt like a creature designed to outlast the Jedi who built him. Then, the kills started piling up on the wrong side. The Empire's nightmare had become the franchise's punchline. In Rebels, Maul himself walked into a room with 2 Imperial trackers and made it look easy. He force-choked the 7th sister mid-retreat, cut down the 5th brother soon after, and the 8th brother eventually fell to his own broken weapon. None of it was hidden, and none of it played as a fluke, which made the message simple. When a real combatant arrives, the people in the black armor fall. 2 episodes of build-up, 1 episode of being outmatched, and the math of that exchange settled into the audience the way every repeated image does. The same outcome repeated across every appearance that followed. The Grand Inquisitor died fighting Kanan. In Jedi Fallen Order, the second sister opened her story by manhandling a young Cal Kestis. By the end of his arc, Cal had defeated her. Vader then arrived in the same chamber and killed her in one motion to prove she was disposable. A year later, in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, the third sister stabbed her own superior, then got stabbed herself by Vader, and was left to die in the dust. By the time the live-action Ahsoka series aired, the embarrassment was complete. Merrick was sliced open in seconds. The damage was not only that they kept losing, audiences learned the structure of every Inquisitor scene before it happened. They entered dramatically, they threatened a Padawan, they ignited a red blade, dueled the hero in front of them, and eventually collapsed into the same defeat waiting at the end of every Inquisitor story. Once the pattern was locked in, fear disappeared. The audience was no longer watching a hunt, they were waiting for the defeat. The more interesting question is not how the Inquisitors lost their threat, it is why the writers kept letting them. The Inquisitors were sold to fans as Sith Light, cheaper apprentices in cheaper armor, swinging cheaper versions of Maul's signature weapon, which meant they got written like Sith, they monologued, philosophized, and posed mid-fight. They tried to seduce Padawans to the dark side and pick duels with protagonists for personal glory. Every one of those choices plugged them into a template Star Wars had spent decades teaching audiences to root against. The Inquisitors were never supposed to fight, they were supposed to hunt. Where a Sith Lord operates as a singular weapon of fate, an Inquisitor operates as a tracker and instrument of attrition. As long as the franchise kept dressing them up as junior Sith and putting them in showcase duels, the audience kept reading them as something they were never built to be. Lesser apprentices auditioning for a Sith role that does not exist in the post-Order 66 era. Each duel framed them as lesser versions of villains the audience had already seen done better, and lesser versions always lose. The misread had a second layer underneath it. Fixing the Inquisitors first required fixing the man they served. Vader had to be terrifying again before his hunters could be. That problem is older than the Inquisitorius. Vader spent most of the prequel era getting unwound in front of the audience. His mystery thinned. His silhouette became a backstory rather than a presence. Filoni has spent the better part of 2 decades quietly walking that damage back. The work began in the strangled duel with Ahsoka at the end of Rebels Season 2, continued through the hallway moment in Rogue One that he cites directly, and carried into the submerged silence of his early Obi-Wan Kenobi appearances. Now in Shadow Lord, supervising director Brad Rau and art director Andre Kirk modeled the new Vader on David Prowse, the bodybuilder who physically played him in the original trilogy. Rau described Prowse in The Empire Strikes Back as a horror in that movie. The entrance copies Ralph McQuarrie's cover art for Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the 1978 novel that imagined Vader emerging from fog. Head writer Matthew Miknevets called the result a silent killer, not because Vader is quiet, but because he never speaks. The mechanical breathing arrives before he does, and the audience is left listening for it the way they would listen for footsteps in a slasher film. Filoni has been blunt about what that means. Vader, he has said directly, does not care. He does not have compassion. He does not recognize people anymore, only obstacles between himself and the thing he wants to destroy. Filoni links the feeling directly to Rogue One. Vader does not speak to the rebels in that hallway. He cuts through them with a single purpose, every swing carrying the weight of his anger, his hatred, and everything left of Anakin Skywalker buried underneath. That description does not just rebuild Vader, it tells the audience what the Empire's hunters actually are. The Inquisitors do not need a personality, a motive, or a philosophy. They need to share the same blankness that defines the man who trained them. Their job is not to understand Force users, negotiate with them, or even hate them personally. Their job is to remove them. When the Inquisitors walk into a room in Shadow Lord, they bring that blankness with them. They're not looking at the Lawsons, or at Daki, or at Maul. They're looking at the things their orders point to. Every other scene in the show is built on that calibration. That choice is not just about Vader. Filoni said that the point of putting the Dark Lord on screen with Maul is to show what happens when power and evil come together in a more perfected version than the broken, scrambling version Maul has become. Vader, in Filoni's framing, is more of a weapon for the Emperor than Maul ever was. The Inquisitors live downstream of the same machine. If the weapon at the top looks like a force of nature, the weapons in his shadow inherit the same atmosphere. Shadow Lord could not have rebuilt the Inquisitorius alone. It had to rebuild the entire chain from the top down. Shadow Lord went to work on Vader's reputation, the Inquisitor's reputation, and the audience's expectations all at once, using a measuring stick the audience had already calibrated for years. That measuring stick is Maul. The former Sith apprentice sits at a strange spot on the power scale, 1 year after the Clone Wars. He is older now, he has been broken in half, brought back, broken again, abandoned by his master, and stripped of nearly everything he built on Mandalore. Yet fans still treat him as one of the deadliest lightsaber combatants alive. Whitwer has said that Maul views the Inquisitors as something darker than the Sith tradition he came from, a different kind of horror entirely. The audience has watched him fight for over 20 years across films, animation, and comics. That recognition is the entire trick, because the moment Maul stops looking invincible, the audience reevaluates the person across from him. Every step back Maul takes is a step up the Inquisitor's reputation. Staging Maul low in the frame, with the threat looming above, is meant to land one feeling. Seeing the devil himself look scared after everything he has done is terrifying in itself. Power scaling Maul is hard. Head writer Matthew Miknevets admitted directly, he is too famous a duelist. Shadow Lord changed the math instead by isolating him and reminding the audience constantly that his mechanical knee was failing. By the time the Masked Inquisitor catches up to Devon on the train, the Dathomirian is not arriving at the head of a Shadow Collective army. He's arriving alone, on a moving carriage, with a leg one bad pivot away from collapse. What follows is a fight he does not control. The spinning blade carves through the space Maul used to own. The fight does not end so much as separate. Maul survives the train encounter, but for the first time in years, survival itself feels like the victory. By episode 7, one Inquisitor is no longer enough. They start hunting in pairs. The 11th brother lands on Janx in a black, scissor-shaped shuttle. He steps out in a hooded robe with an avian mask, and the design team internally calls him the Crow. Filoni created him originally for Tales of the Jedi, which means Shadow Lord takes place before that episode, before he ever meets Ahsoka. In the cave at the waterfall, the two armored predators corner Maul on a stone bridge above a pool. He force jumps to a lower level, and they follow. He fights back with a double-bladed lightsaber, but the result is immediate. The former Sith apprentice cannot match the two Darksiders on his own, and he retreats deeper into the cave. For the first time in his life, the apprentice of Sidious is the prey. When Scorn, One of Maul's Night Brothers charges in to save him. The 11th brother impales him through the chest in front of his own brother Icarus, then force hurls his body out of the cave. The kill echoes Maul's worst memory. Years earlier in the Clone Wars, Sidious struck down Savage in almost the exact same manner. The Dathomirian looks at the Masked Inquisitor and sees what he could have become if he had stayed obedient. A weapon shaped by the dark side, emptied out, and pointed wherever Sidious demanded. Once Vader steps into the finale, the hierarchy becomes unmistakable. Vader is the perfected weapon. The Inquisitors are the mass-produced version. Maul is what happens when the machine breaks. And on Janx, that machine finally closes around him. Cornered at the cave entrance, Maul raises his hands. The Inquisitors prepare to finish him on the Emperor's order. There is no negotiation or monologue. With nowhere left to run, Maul drops to his knees. That single shot does more for the Inquisitorius than a decade of marketing material ever did. When an unfamiliar Padawan dies at the hands of an Inquisitor, the audience accepts it as part of the story. Maul having to bury 2 hunters under the collapsing cave just to escape with his life, only for them to emerge from the rubble unhurt, feels like proof that something in the galaxy has changed. Head writer Matthew Miknevets described Vader's arrival on Janx and made the categorical distinction explicit. Vader, he said, is obviously not an Inquisitor. He is an apprentice. Shadow Lord treats the 3 groups as entirely different kinds of weapons. The Inquisitors track, wait, and corner. They arrive with gunships, stormtroopers, surveillance droids, and chains of command behind them. Their lightsabers are tools, not symbols. As Sam Witwer later put it, the Inquisitors do not fight for a principle. They fight because they were sent. Once Shadow Lord stopped treating the Inquisitors like Sith, the entire structure of their scenes changed. They stopped entering fights dramatically. They started arriving early, already waiting where the heroes would eventually corner themselves. Near the Sludge Lake in Episode 9, Maul finally tries to humiliate Merrick the same way Sith humiliate weaker opponents. Maul, exhausted and surrounded, hurls the cleanest possible insult at his attacker. He tells Merrick he's merely a disposable pawn of Sidious, a tool the Emperor will discard the moment he stops being useful. A Sith Lord would have answered with a speech. A Sith Apprentice would have answered with rage. Merrick answers it with a kick. The Empire does not need its hunters to monologue. The production team built him to register that way physically too. Behind-the-scenes notes call him Wraith-like, and the sound team layered a creaking effect under every gesture the supervising director jokingly calls bone leather. But the mystery runs deeper than the horror styling. Filoni created Merrick for the first season of Ahsoka, where he barely spoke and died in a single stroke from Ahsoka's lightsaber. When he fell, green mist poured from the cut in his armor where blood should have been. The implication has never been resolved on screen. Shadow Lord shows him earlier in the timeline, carrying the same uncanny stillness he had in Ahsoka. The series deepens the mystery without answering it. The mystery is not what Merrick is, it is that no one knows. The crow carries the same energy in a different register. The avian silhouette moves through corridors and forests like something out of a slasher film. At one point, the 2 hunters wait silently at the bottom of an elevator shaft for the fugitives to descend. Every Inquisitor seen in Shadow Lord puts the protagonist in a place they did not choose. Merrick cuts through the door of the Lawson apartment before Daki finishes a sentence. Merrick and his partner arrive at the toxic sludge lake while the fugitives are mid-crossing on a broken skiff with nowhere to retreat. The Imperial trackers dictate the geography, the timing, and the rhythm. The Empire does not need its hunters to beat anyone. It needs them to never stop coming. That is the galaxy Shadow Lord finally sells. Daki, an elderly Jedi Master, recognizes the threat instantly when Brander Lawson mentions the interrogation. The room changes the second Merrick's name is spoken. The Lawsons, who are not Force-sensitive at all, end up dragged into a manhunt that consumes their family. Two Boots, a police droid, gets shocked through a network terminal just for being adjacent to the case. The hunters do not just threaten the protagonists, they contaminate everyone around them. That is what an Imperial purge looks like from inside. This is the part of the Empire that other Star Wars stories have been showing for years. Cal Kestis in Jedi Fallen Order spends his opening hour hiding in plain sight, scrapping starships in dirty overalls because being recognized as a Jedi is a death sentence. The second sister hunts him by issuing a public execution threat to everyone on the work site. In Survivor, even after the rebellion takes shape, the Imperial machine keeps grinding. Surveillance, registration, propaganda, informants, and summary execution. The atmosphere those games build is a galaxy where every Force sensitive who lived through Order 66 has spent the last decade making themselves smaller and quieter to stay alive. By the time the climax arrives and the Imperial trackers fight alongside Vader himself, the fear has fully returned. Devon holds off both Merrick and the Crow on a broken stone bridge with 2 blades. The weight of the moment lands because of what these hunters have already done to her teacher. Daki dies in front of them, and Devon nearly walks into Vader's path. The fix was never about lightsabers, it was about belief. For years, fans had stopped believing the Inquisitors could win. Shadow Lord did not argue them back into belief, it changed what winning meant. The Empire's hunters do not have to defeat Force users to be terrifying. They only have to make the galaxy small enough that Force users have nowhere left to stand. The real twist is that Shadow Lord did not actually fix the Inquisitors. It revealed them by finally framing the Empire's hunters through the eyes of the one survivor of Sidious, who recognized exactly what they were. But Shadow Lord only reveals one layer of the machine. The full structure of the Inquisitorius, from the Grand Inquisitor down to the lowest brother and sister, is its own story. And if you want the complete tragedy of the apprentice who understood exactly what the Empire creates, Maul's path from Naboo to Shadow Lord continues there.